If you've watched the movie Turning Red, many of the major themes in that movie were about adhering to familial expectations while also straddling the life of an American teenager. May, who is the main character and is of Chinese descent, struggles with balancing these through the whole movie with the expectations of her mother and the expectations of her friends. We later see that May's mom also struggled with similar things when she was a child. She says to May, "I'm just so sick of being perfect. I'm never going to be good enough for her, or anyone." While the obvious problem of turning into a panda is not a problem that we have to face, we can still see the problem of Asian teenagers feeling stuck between the culture of Asia and the culture of America. This is a quote from Jhumpa Lahiri's novel The Namesake, provided by the College Board, which explains a similar experience in a Bengali boy named Gogol, who also feels stuck between the culture of his parents and the culture of America. And he hates his name because it's not American enough. He thinks it weighs him down, and he wishes that he could have a cool, Americanized name. And in this instance, cool is meant as an American name that's easy for Americans to pronounce and Americans to understand. These instances led me to the research question. In the last 30 years, to what extent has cultural assimilation in the United States negatively impacted first-generation child immigrants from Southern and Eastern Asia? My argument is that cultural assimilation has negatively impacted first-generation immigrant children from South and East Asian countries by affecting parental relationships and impacting mental health. Good morning, my name is Maya Venkatraman, and first let's talk about the effects on parental relationships. This quote by Marcia Carteret explains the differences between Asian culture and American culture. Asians tend to have more of a groupthink mentality, and their family is very important in all of Asian culture. They see going outside of your family circle as betrayal rather than growing up, and stepping out as seen as disloyal, not a natural process. This is especially seen in terms of where the children immigrate from. Chun Sia Wu and Ruth Chow explain that the parental warmth is extremely different in European versus Chinese immigrants. European Americans attested that their parental warmth was twice as high as the warmth from Chinese American parents. This is also seen in Chung et al.'s article, which explains that respect rules over every other Chinese value like filial piety and politeness. This is not seen in American culture and is much more emphasized in Asia than it is in America. This graph by Pew Research only emphasizes this problem. This graph is the percentage of Asian Americans say that their parents from their country of origin put too much pressure on children to do well in school. As you can see, 39% of US Asians think that their parents put too much pressure on them to succeed. And this can make the children see their parents as more of an authority figure rather than someone that is supposed to love and care for them. This can be further divided into 60% of Korean Americans, 49% of Vietnamese Americans, and 43% of Indian Americans. Plus, an article about neural sensitivity provided by the College Board explains that parents are the key shapers of attitude as a child is growing up and entering their adult life. These parenting strategies are a pointed example of how exactly relations can differ between children and parents. Which begs the question, is it working? This graph from Pew Research follows up the previous one, which explains that these parenting strategies do seem to be working because it tells you that 49% of Asian Americans have a bachelor's degree when they're ages 25 and older, compared to 28% of the US population. Plus, Asians also make almost $15,000 more in median household income than the general US population does. Which begs the question, why does this occur? No, it's not because of natural cognitive ability, it's because of something different. This is a graph by Sin and Shia, which explains the difference between Asians and white students. As you can see by the achievement, cognitive ability, and academic effort sections. The center axis indicates that Asians have higher achievement, higher cognitive ability, or more academic effort respectively, whereas below the axis indicates the opposite. As you can see in the cognitive ability section in the center, only East Asians have a significant advantage over whites in terms of cognitive ability. Whereas on the other hand, all subgroups of Asians put in more academic effort and therefore all had higher rates of success. Which also begs the question, how does this affect the students in terms of their mental health? This is a visualization of the tiger mom effect, which is a phenomenon that occurs when Asian parents feel the need to push their children to be 100% perfect. Alice Park details this exclusively in her article by explaining her own experiences as the child of a tiger mom. She tells you that she was the perfect stereotype of an Asian American, good at math, overachiever, and booked her entire schedule weeks in advance. She spent every single weekend in piano lessons and music theory, and this led her to be able to go to college and graduate school just as her parents expected her to. but this was at the cost of her entire childhood. She explains that she felt, quote, chained to the piano bench while all of her friends were outside playing and she just wanted to go outside with them and take a dip in the pool. Meanwhile, this can have negative effects on mental health because, as you know, when you work for a very long period of time without any sort of break, this can lead to burnout and overwork. Haley Harris details some of these effects of overwork as cynicism, exhaustion, boredom, and depression in teenagers, and this can lead to very negative mental effects in their adult lives. This is a visualization of all of the Asian American adults in the United States. As the graph from Mental Health America tells you, 6.1% of the United States population identifies as Asian American or Pacific Islander, or AAPI, and of those, 15% reported having a mental illness in the last year. That is nearly 1% of the United States, just in this small subcategory, which, as the graph tells you, this is more than the number of dentists, post-secondary teachers, and lawyers in the United States combined. The article furthers up that of Asian American Pacific Islander adults with a mental illness, 73.1% don't receive treatment, compared to just 56.7% of the overall population. This is because of those familial values that I mentioned earlier, and mental health and treatment has a huge stigma in Asian culture, which can only exacerbate these mental health effects on children. How do we solve this problem? The first solution is increasing parental education. This would educate parents on schooling options for their children and American culture as a whole. This could be done through more rigorous testing when parents become naturalized U.S. citizens, mandatory briefings before school starts, or even something as simple as pamphlets that parents can pick up from the school. However, this solution does have limitations. The first limitation is that this solution is not specific to Asian immigration. Once the solution is implemented, it would have to apply equally to every ethnicity in order to not get sued for discrimination effects. The second limitation is that this relies too heavily on parental involvement. As I stated before, neural sensitivity and parent influence has one of the highest mental factors on the statistics of their children. This can further tell you that the cycle of parental achievement and gap, this is very hard to break, especially when people move to America and the cultures are so different. This could lead to the parents wanting to preserve the culture of their home country instead of letting their child assimilate to the country that they're currently in. The second solution is increasing teacher education. This would implement a variety of changes in terms of teaching to help students feel more comfortable. This could include integrating language learning into earlier grade levels, reducing grade repetition, or increasing training for teachers on how to adapt to students of all cultural backgrounds. This solution has limitations too. The first solution is that it's not specific enough to Asian immigration since it could be easily adapted from multiple other cultures. The second limitation is that teachers would have to be comfortable with a lot of different cultures from all over Asia, and this could be overwhelming and drive people away from the position. This is the solution that solves better because when teachers are respectful of a student's beliefs, this can lessen the effect of culture shock on students and therefore lead to less stress of parents versus children's expectations between Asia and America. Thank you, and what questions do you have?
I do have 2 questions for you. Let me just scribble down the time.
Can I put this down?
Yeah. All right, 2 questions. First up, what evidence did you gather that you didn't use, and then why didn't you use it?
A lot of the data that I was able to gather from my paper was on parental relationships. I chose not to include a lot of this data in my presentation because a lot of it was giant quotes that looked very visually unappealing. Some of my quotes could be entire paragraphs, and this looked very visually unappealing on the slide. So instead I chose to cut out a lot of the information that I had and instead use this information in my script to further explain the graphs. For example, on that graph of Pew Research that I used to explain the effects of parental relationships and the stress that this had on children, I was able to elaborate on that with quotes from the paper in my script, but I chose not to put that on the actual presentation because it looked very unappealing.
Okay. And what advice would you have for other researchers who consider this as a topic in the future?
Some advice that I would have for other researchers is to start small. I started with this topic by using personal experiences from a lot of my friends and relatives. I have several friends that are Asian, and my father is an Indian immigrant himself. So I was able to start out this topic with, what effects did this immigration have on you? What mental effects did this have? How did this impact your school life? And these statements and the testimony that I got from my friends and relatives were able to give me a great starting off point for my research so I didn't have to completely start from scratch. If a student considered this something similar to this topic, I would advise that they start with asking people what the effects of their immigration were in order so they don't start from scratch and have to work through all of the information by themselves.